The night my mother-in-law locked me out of the lake house and told my husband I'd left on my own. That was the night I finally understood what the last 4 years of my marriage had actually been. It was July, a Friday. We were supposed to be celebrating my sister-in-law's birthday at the family's cabin up in the Ozarks, about 2.5 hours outside of Kansas City. I'd driven up separately because I had a work call that ran late, and my husband, I'll call him my husband for now, though that word feels strange on my tongue when I think back on that weekend, had gone up with his family the evening before. By the time I pulled off the highway and onto the gravel road leading to the cabin, it was almost 10 o'clock at night. The cicadas were screaming. My headlights hit the tree line, and I remember thinking how beautiful it all looked, the way the moon sat just above the water. I had no idea what was waiting for me on the other side of that door. I knocked. Nobody answered. I knocked again, louder this time, and I could see lights on inside, could hear music and laughter through the windows. I tried the door, locked. I went around to the back deck and tried that door too, also locked. I called my husband's phone. It rang and went to voicemail. I texted him, nothing. I stood there on that deck for almost 10 minutes listening to his family laugh and drink and carry on inside, and I thought, okay, maybe they just can't hear me. Maybe it's a coincidence. So I went back around to the front and knocked harder, knocked long enough that my knuckles started to ache. The porch light came on. My mother-in-law opened the door exactly 6 inches. I can still see the way she looked at me through that gap. Not surprised, not apologetic, just flat, like I was a delivery she hadn't ordered. She told me that my husband had said I called to say I wasn't coming. She told me they'd already given my room to his cousin. She told me it was late and they were in the middle of celebrating, and maybe it was best if I just found a hotel in town and they'd all see me tomorrow. Then she closed the door. I stood there on that porch for I don't know how long. Long enough for the porch light to click off on its automatic timer and leave me standing in the dark. My car was there, my phone was in my hand, and somewhere on the other side of that door was my husband, who had either told his mother a lie or had not told her anything at all, and I couldn't decide which one was worse. I need to back up a little so you understand how I got here, because this didn't come out of nowhere, even if it took me until that moment on that porch to finally see it clearly. My name is Felicity, and I married into the Hargrove family 4 years ago when I was 29. I want to be fair, because I've spent a long time going over this in my head, trying not to be the kind of person who just paints everyone as a villain. My husband's mother, I'll call her my mother-in-law, was never outright cruel to me. It was never anything I could point to and say, look, this is the thing. It was quieter than that. It was the way she'd correct how I set the table at holiday dinners. The way she'd ask my husband if he'd eaten before we came over, as if my cooking wasn't something she trusted. The way she'd talk about his ex-girlfriend, a woman named Candace, who I'd never met and didn't need to know about, like she was still part of the family in some imaginary way. She'd slip her name into conversations. Candace used to make this sauce from scratch. Candace always came to the lake house early to help set up, not mean, just present. Like a ghost that kept finding ways to remind you it was still in the room. My husband, I'll call him by his initial R, he never really pushed back on it. When I brought it up, he'd say I was being sensitive. He'd say his mother was just that way with everyone, that I needed to give her more time. 4 years in, I was still giving her more time. 4 years in, I was still being told that I was misreading the room. The Ozarks trip was supposed to be my chance to reset things. R had suggested it, actually. He'd said his sister, I'll call her his sister, was turning 30 and the whole family was going up to the lake house and it would be a good opportunity. She's been warming up to you, he said. I want to remember exactly how he said it, because those words matter to me now. She's been warming up to you, not she likes you now, not you're part of this family, just warming up, like I was still something cold that needed to be managed. I went back to my car and sat in the driver's seat for a while. I didn't cry. I remember being almost surprised by that I didn't cry. I just sat there looking at the cabin through the windshield, at the warm yellow light coming through the curtains, and I thought very clearly, something has to end tonight. I tried R's phone one more time. This time he picked up on the second ring. Hey, he said, and there was background noise, music, someone laughing at something. You get lost? I told him I was sitting outside in my car, that his mother had refused to let me in, that she'd told me he said I wasn't coming. There was a pause. And then he said, oh, I think there was just a misunderstanding. Just like that. A misunderstanding. Come on in, I'll go tell her. The door's locked, Ra. Oh, hang on. He hung up. A few minutes later the front door opened and he was there, stepping out onto the porch in his socks, looking at me not with guilt or embarrassment, but with this expression I'd seen too many times. This careful, neutral face he put on when he was managing me. Like I was a situation, not a person. He said his mother must have misheard. He said it was probably just a miscommunication. He said let's not make a big deal of this tonight. His sister was celebrating. It wasn't the time. I asked him point blank, "Did you tell her I wasn't coming?" He looked at me for a moment, and then he looked off to the side, at the tree line, the way people do when they're choosing their words. And he said, "I might have mentioned that you might not make it, because of your work stuff. She probably just took that the wrong way." That was the moment, not the locked door, not the dark porch. That was it. The way he couldn't even look at me when he said it. The way he'd armed his mother with just enough information to do what she did. And then he'd step back and let it happen. And now he was standing here in his socks, asking me not to make a big deal of it. I told him I was going to find somewhere to sleep tonight and we could talk tomorrow. He tried to tell me I was overreacting. I got back in my car and I drove down the gravel road and back onto the highway. I had my wallet. I had my phone with about 40% battery left. I had a half tank of gas and not a single idea where the nearest town with an open motel might be. The GPS on my phone said the nearest town was about 18 miles east. I started driving. About 12 miles in, my tire went flat. I want you to sit with that for a second, because I had to sit with it for a very long time. On the side of a Missouri highway at almost 11 o'clock at night, with 18-wheelers blowing past me at 70 miles an hour, and the closest town still 6 miles away. I had a spare in my trunk, but I'd never changed a tire by myself in my life, and the jack that came with the car was a type I'd never used. I tried. I got out there in the dark with my phone flashlight and I tried. And I got the lug nuts partway loose, and then I couldn't get the jack positioned right. And a truck went past, and the wind from it almost knocked me over, and I stopped. I stood there on the side of that highway and I thought, is this the moment I call him? Is this when I ask R to come help me? And I couldn't do it. I physically couldn't make myself dial his number, because I knew what he would say. I knew exactly how he would say it. And I could not give him the satisfaction of rescuing me from a situation his silence had created. I called AAA instead. Membership fee I'd been paying for 6 years and had never used once. The dispatch told me someone could be there in about 45 minutes. I sat in my car with the hazard lights blinking, and I watched the highway and I thought about things. I thought about the first Thanksgiving I'd spent with his family, when his mother had made a point of asking every person at the table to say what they were grateful for. And when it came to me, she'd smiled very nicely and moved straight on to the person next to me. Like I hadn't been there. Like my voice wasn't one she needed to include. R had not said anything. I had sat there and told myself it was an accident, she'd just been distracted, I was being sensitive. I had spent 4 years telling myself I was being sensitive. I thought about the baby shower I'd had 18 months ago. The one his mother had offered to co-host. The way she'd invited almost none of my friends, because she said she didn't have their contact information, even though I'd sent her a list. The way the party had been full of her friends and church ladies who didn't know me, women who kept calling me by the wrong name, until I stopped correcting them. R had told me I needed to be more grateful because she'd put in a lot of effort. I thought about last Christmas, when she'd given everyone in the family a framed photo for the holidays. Every couple had a portrait, every grandchild had a picture, and the frame she gave us had a photo of R by himself, from some family trip years before I existed in the picture at all. She'd said she couldn't find any good recent photos of the two of us. I'd said nothing. R had said nothing. I'd put it in a closet. The AAA truck arrived in 41 minutes. The driver was a man I'd guess was in his mid-50s, very calm, the kind of person who has done something 1,000 times and lets that competence speak for itself. He had the spare on in under 10 minutes. While he was working, he asked if I was all right, and something about the straightforward way he asked it, not prying, just checking, made me tell him the short version, that I'd had a hard night, that I was trying to get somewhere to sleep. He finished up and then he walked back to his truck and came back with a card for a motel about 5 miles up the road, a family-owned place he said was decent and not too expensive. He said they'd probably have vacancy this time of night. He said, and I've thought about this 100 times since, sometimes the car breaks down when it needs to, gets you to stop and think. I thanked him and I drove to the motel. The night clerk was a young woman who couldn't have been more than 22, and when I checked in, she must have seen something in my face, because she upgraded me to a room with a little sitting area without me asking. Didn't make a thing of it. Just handed me the key and told me there was a vending machine at the end of the hall, and the coffee in the lobby started at 6. I lay on that bed in that quiet motel room, and I did something I hadn't done in a very long time. I let myself think honestly. Not the version of thinking where you immediately start explaining everything away. Not the version where you pre-forgive everyone before they've even asked for it. Just honest thinking. R had told his mother I might not make it. He'd done it quietly, without telling me, and he'd done it in a way that gave her the opening she'd been looking for. Maybe he hadn't planned it. Maybe he hadn't sat down and decided to sabotage the weekend. But he'd known his mother well enough to know what she'd do with that information. He'd known, and he'd said it anyway, and then he'd gone inside and had drinks with his family while I was standing in the dark knocking on a door that wasn't going to open for me. That's not a misunderstanding, that's a choice. My phone buzzed. It was R. I let it go to voicemail. It buzzed again. Then a text. I don't know why you're making this into something. Come back tomorrow and we can all have a good day. I turned my phone face down on the nightstand and went to sleep. In the morning I drove back. Not because I'd forgiven anyone and not because I wanted a good day. I went back because I'd had 8 hours to decide what I actually wanted to say, and I wasn't going to say it over the phone. When I pulled up to the cabin, they were all outside on the deck having breakfast. His mother, his sister, his aunt and uncle, his cousin who'd apparently taken my room. All of them with plates of eggs and coffee mugs, looking like a magazine spread, like nothing at all had happened. His mother saw me coming across the yard and I watched something move across her face. Not quite guilt, more like recalculation, the look of someone deciding how to play the next minute. She said, "Felicity, we were wondering when you'd be back. We were wondering." Like I was the one who'd gone somewhere by choice. I didn't say anything to her. I looked at R and I said, "Can we talk inside?" He followed me in. We stood in the kitchen and I told him everything I'd told myself the night before, as clearly as I could say it. Not crying, not yelling. Just, here's what happened, here's what I understand now, here's what I need. I told him that I needed him to stop managing me. I needed him to stop letting his mother run interference on our marriage. I needed him to stop calling it sensitivity. When I named things that were actually happening, I told him that what he'd done the night before, setting up that misunderstanding, and then asking me to absorb it quietly, that was a line I was not willing to let go unmarked. He started to say something about his mother, about how she was just protective, about how I had to understand where she came from. And I stopped him. I said, "I'm not talking about your mother right now, I'm talking about you." He got quiet in a way he almost never got quiet. There was something happening in his face that I couldn't entirely read. Not anger, something more complicated than that. Something that looked a little bit like someone seeing themselves in a mirror they'd been avoiding. We were in that kitchen for a long time. I won't tell you that everything got resolved in one conversation, because it didn't, and I think anyone who's been in a marriage with complicated in-laws knows that's not how it works. But something shifted, something cracked open, that had been sealed shut for 4 years. He said he was sorry. He said it plainly, without conditions attached. And if you've ever had someone apologize to you with a but in the middle of it, you know how rare and significant it is when the but doesn't come. His mother knocked on the kitchen door at some point and opened it an inch, and he turned around and said very calmly, "We're talking. Give us a little while." And he closed it. She gave us a little while. I don't know what that cost her. I know what it meant to me. That afternoon we sat down with the whole family, and R told his mother that what had happened the night before was not okay, and that going forward some things were going to be different. I watched his mother's face during this. I watched her work through it, the initial tightening, the recalibration, the moment where she must have decided that whatever she said next was going to matter a great deal to her son. She didn't apologize outright. I don't know that she ever will. But she said she hadn't meant for me to feel unwelcome. She said she wanted things to be better. I don't know if she meant it. Probably some of it she meant, and some of it she didn't, and the truth lives somewhere in the space between. But here's what I do know. On the drive home 2 days later, R reached across the center console and put his hand over mine, and he said, "I've been letting you carry things you shouldn't have had to carry alone." That's all he said, but it was enough. It was the most honest thing he'd said to me in a long time. I'm telling you this because I know some of you are going to hear this story and think, "Leave." And I understand that. I've read enough comments on enough videos to know that when a story involves a difficult mother-in-law and a husband who keeps looking the other way, the audience tends to have a verdict ready before the story's even finished. I get it. I've felt that way watching other people's stories. But life doesn't always end at the locked door. Sometimes what's on the other side of the locked door is the conversation you should have had years ago. And the question is just whether you're both finally willing to have it. R and I are still married. Things are different, not perfect, nothing is, but different in ways that are real, not just polite. His mother and I will probably never be close. I've made my peace with that. What I needed was for my husband to see it, name it, and stand somewhere. He finally did. But I want to tell you the thing that still sits with me most when I think about that night. It's not the locked door, and it's not the flat tire on the dark highway, and it's not even standing in that kitchen saying hard true things out loud for the first time. It's the AAA driver. It's the young woman at the motel desk who upgraded my room without making me ask. It's the way two strangers on a bad night treated me with more basic consideration than the people I'd been bending myself in half to belong to. That's the thing that cracked something open in me, even before I walked back into that cabin. Because there's something about being treated simply and kindly by someone who owes you nothing that makes you finally understand what it's cost you to keep accepting less than that from the people who are supposed to love you the most. I drove home from those mountains 2 days later with the windows down and the radio up, and R's hand on mine, and something in my chest that felt like the first deep breath I'd taken in a very long time. I still think about that porch light, the way it clicked off and left me standing in the dark, all by myself, while laughter came through the curtained windows. I think about it, and then I think about everything that happened after, and I think, sometimes the light has to go out before you can see where you actually are.